Welcome to another episode of the Point of No Return podcast. On this week's show, I had the pleasure of speaking with Anick Beaulieu, CEO at C2 Montreal. It was a real pleasure to speak with Anick, and as you'll see, I'm a huge fan of C2 Montreal. Been going for years now, and I think it's the most interesting conference in North America, I would say. At least the most interesting conference that I've been to. And Anick recently took over as CEO, obviously during a very troubled time, right, with the pandemic. As you can imagine, that type of a business where people meet in person, it became illegal to meet in person for a few years, and now coming out of that world, coming out of this pandemic, they really have, I want to say, some very interesting ideas as to how to tackle the new world that we're living in. We spoke a lot about like her leadership during this time, and the importance of creating meaningful experiences, which is really tied to the core model of C2. Some very interesting facets of C2. They're not just organizing conferences, but they have an agency model which actually represents the bulk of the business. And we spoke quite a bit about it. We spoke about this duality of commerce and creativity, nurturing creative talent in the city, and also nurturing a culture of creativity in her organization, right? And the challenge of maintaining a fair balance. Nick, as you'll see, is a rock star. It was a real pleasure to speak with her, and I hope you enjoy today's conversation. Nick, it's a real pleasure to have you on. As I was saying before we're recording, I'm a huge fan of C2 Montreal. Like I think I've been lucky. I've gone to every single edition since it was founded. So I'm very lucky. So I've been able
Wow.
to see the progress. We're going to talk a lot about C2, but I want to maybe start with you personally. Where let's talk about your interest in the event space. You're obviously a pioneer in that world. You've worked a long time. So what got you interested in l'événementiel, the event space?
Well, strangely enough, my background was real estate. And there were a lot of similarities between the work we were doing then and the actual experiential industry, just because like when you're a developer, you work with amazing creative people, right? Designers, architects, um, in kind of conceiving what the experience will be for the homeowner or for that community that you're trying to build. It's project based. There's at some point when you're going to deliver, the doors are going to open just like an event at a certain date. And so I feel that even if it doesn't seem like these two worlds are exactly connected, like the fact of like having to sell a vision, trying to create environments where people will have an amazing experience and will thrive, kind of goes back and links back to a lot of, I guess, similarities. And I guess I'm a very social person. I love being surrounded by humans. I think it's one of the most powerful ways that you can connect to when you're actually living something amazing. And so I guess that kind of what draws me in. And C2 has always been something that I enjoyed partaking in as a participant. And so when came the opportunity to actually join the team at the moment, they approached me. I just felt like, it was somewhere I could really have fun and thrive and develop as a person. And then the group of humans that are working at the company are just absolutely amazing. The projects we're doing are cool. Our clients are great. Plus, it has impact, like, especially when you look at C2 Montreal, like, there's actually real tangible impact for our community, which is also something nice to kind of work towards, feeling like or you can make a difference.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot to unpack, and I like how you made that parallel between the real estate market and the experiential market. I never really made that connection, so I find it's interesting where you had a little bit of that pattern recognition. You mentioned being attracted to that position. I believe you're originally hired as as in charge of growth and partnership.
Yep.
So maybe walk us through a little bit of what you saw as appeal. You mentioned the people and kind of the magic, but then also kind of the challenges of joining. Like I want to say at that time, it was almost like a startup, right? A few years under its belt, but still very
Yeah.
much going through growing pains.
Well, yeah, and I mean, we just lived a few years that were other growing pains. But I think for me, because when I was in real estate, it was a family run business. And with that came many advantages and then, things that I felt I wanted different in the next opportunity I was going to pursue. And so, and the things I really enjoyed was all this kind of like, entrepreneurial mindset, the fact that you don't have to fit in the box, um, and just kind of like creating your own opportunities. And at the time that I joined C2, we were just starting the actual growth of our white label business or studio business, like working, exporting the model we do for C2 Montreal to brands in a white label way. Plus all the work we're doing in the spaces, which was another tightly linked, aspect to my previous career. And so I knew that, from a young age, I always worked on international projects. So for me, the opportunity needed to be an entrepreneurial mindset. It needed to have global scale. So I needed to be able to kind of do business with outside of, Montreal or Quebec or Canada. And then I wanted the product to be amazing. Like I wanted it to be something that I was proud of, that I could associate with, and that I felt like kind of fitted my own brand as a person. And so it was really that kind of intersection where C2 met just all of these aspects that I was looking for. And they were daring and like having someone, I guess, like me too, that wasn't necessarily a specialist in one area, that had more kind of an entrepreneurial profile, and that was, self-motivated, but that also wanted to kind of take space and, create on my own opportunities. And so I feel like it was just a really good fit.
Yeah, it's
And I think it was the right call.
I think so. It looks like it. Like you've been now, like I guess coming up on 8 years, and you're like obviously taking over as CEO. And we'll talk about your role as CEO and would you see the
Mm,
vision. I want to unpack maybe two parts that you mentioned, right? I think there's one part I'll come to it after, like the magic, and that's the piece that I'd love to understand, but maybe more from an operation perspective. Like, what makes this experiential business? Like, how does it tick? Like, what makes it a good business? I feel like there's a lot of
mm,
annual cost, and then profit is only kind of like Q4 for a retailer. It ends up being very specific, where you make all the profit in a specific moment of time. And then maybe the other aspect of that, you mentioned diversification, right? Expanding the business model, but maybe let's start with
yeah.
the core business and unpack it a little bit, if you may.
Well, the core business actually is the Inc., right? Because C2 Montreal is a non for profit. So there's not that notion of profit. There's really just a notion of, what is the impact that we're creating for our community, both from a visibility standpoint, for an economic or deal flow standpoint, and in terms of like building a brand that actually resonates with our audience. That doesn't mean there's no challenges in like revenue generation and just managing the actual event, because for sure, it's a tough business to be in a way, because like ticket sales are usually coming in at the very end. We're in a tough climate right now economically. So from a partnership perspective, there's a lot of volatility. Um, we're also out, of a crisis that really had a big impact on many aspects of our business. So, that if I set that aside, I think experiences, if you look at it more from, a philosophical standpoint, are really a powerful tool, um, for brands to connect to their communities, right? Their clients, their employees. And I feel that with the state we're in right now, where, our model of how we work, how we engage with clients, how we travel, it's been so disturbed in the last couple of years that, the power of creating meaningful experiences, time outside of the boardroom that I call, which is really precious for all of us who need to do biz dev and develop relationships with our clients. There is huge value in being able to capture attention, to spend time kind of delving deeper than into simple like commercial relationships. So having the time to go deeper and understanding, what really matters for that person. How can we help them? How do we actually enjoy doing work together? And so I feel that this is really um, a big part of the magic or the power that we unpacked for our clients. And that model, when you look at the white label side of the business, is really more like an agency, right? Where we provide services for our clients. There's a mix of like human talent that's involved and then production that's involved. But it's not the same model than when we produce an event under our own brand and where we have like the promoter risk, like C2 Montreal, for instance.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, so there's the two sides of the stool. If maybe without sharing specifics, but like, what, how big is the agency side? Like, as a proportion to the promoting business?
Well, it's bigger than the promoting business, that's for sure. So most of our projects are done for clients, and then C2 Montreal is our flagship. You know, it's where we experiment with new formats and technologies, and where we kind of have creative freedom because it's under our own brand. So we're kind of our client in a way where, for sure people, our partners are our clients, the various governments that support us too, and, the ticket buyers, but we're still kind of in control from a curation perspective and from a creative perspective.
Yeah, that's fascinating because you can make like a bunch of mistakes and experiment, and it's kind of like your playground, and then that helps fuel the other side when you go and you see a brand. Hey, we tried this. Did it work? This really worked, right? So you're able to have like a little bit of like I said, experimentation before you go and you pitch. Obviously, like a big global, like Fortune 100 brand.
And what's been really interesting in the last couple of months, I would say, is that there's been like it used to be more one direction where C2 Montreal, I feel, was really the fuel to this innovation. Um, but we've onboarded like new talent, new creative. We have some amazing clients that are really pushing us too from a creative perspective. And so I see now that there's this flow, um, where C2 Montreal definitely serves its purpose as, an R&D platform, but it also gets fuel from some of the work that we're doing with our clients. And so it's interesting to notice, actually. It's great.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's good. Yeah, very good model. I know we both said we don't want to talk about COVID before recording, or like, okay, we're kind of fed up. But there's one part I want to unpack, and I think I'll change my. I had my original question was like, how has your industry changed as a result of COVID? But I feel maybe the deeper question here is that we've all been working from home, and you spoke about meaningful experiences, and it feels like that part seems more valuable moving forward, right? So people connecting in person, it's slightly less common than it used to be, right? And you could see that, a lot of downtown cores have been impacted by this, right? So I feel that both businesses, particularly the brand one, should be gaining momentum. Just from a market tailwind perspective, like post COVID, of course, is that accurate a statement? How would you add maybe a little bit more color around it?
I think there's definitely a craving for people to be together. Um, but there's also a bunch of forces that are pulling in different directions. Um, Sustainability, right? So lots of clients right now are far more thoughtful around flying people all around, and kind of that whole notion of footprint, right? Carbon footprint and stuff. And so that's kind of complexifying meetings in a way. Then budgets, who are we actually investing in when we're thinking about designing experiences? Is it still for 1,000 people, or is it for 250 of our top people, where we invest maybe more per person with less individuals, but we really kind of create something that's extremely meaningful? And then, technology, which enables many different ways of connecting. When you look at, yes, the metaverse, but all the different ways that we've been used to kind of engaging with one another, it really changed the way we behave. And so I think that there's a need, there's definitely a desire, but there's still a lot of factors that don't make it as straightforward as like, oh, it's just tons more demands. I think there's demand, but it's also shifting. Uh, and then, it's also like people travel less, like the numbers, when you look at an executive in a large company right now, I think it's like a fifth of the travel that's being done or something like that. Like, I need to check or confirm the stats. So that has effect, right? So maybe someone that used to go to South by and C2 and Cannes and NFT New York and all of these, like maybe they're now choosing two out of five or out of six. So how do you capture this individual? So I think that there's huge opportunities. There's definitely something really interesting in kind of seizing the upside of that shift in the industry, but it's not like super straightforward. Like there's still we still need to adapt to the realities that are out there.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's super interesting the way you put it, Nick, because it's like, yeah, it's not like you said, it's not straightforward. And there's a lot of like forces pulling in different directions. How do you think about navigating that? And certainly now, as you know, like more recent role and nomination as CEO, I imagine from a strategic perspective, you have to stay quite nimble and agile. How do you think
Yeah.
about that? And then maybe more more operationally, how do you then put that in place, right? How do you then
Mm.
put a process that takes advantage of these opportunities, and so you could be what's the opportunistic part of the pun.
Yeah, for sure. Which I think is important. Well, for your first question, I feel that the product needs to be top. The experience, and I feel that, for a property like C2 Montreal, who's a non-for-profit, there was huge pressures, economic pressures in the last 3 years. No stability, very little predictability in terms of revenues. Thank God we had support from long lasting partners and from the various government entities, that really helped us pull through. Um, but when you're kind of fighting for survival, it's not like your product or the experience or the innovation is necessarily, you know, top of mind. Um, Without saying it's not, because there's plenty of different things that we tried during this time that we're kind of capitalizing on. But I feel that now, like even when I look at the upcoming edition of C2 Montreal, who's coming up May 24th to 26th this year, downtown, like super exciting, we're really focusing on the experience. We're trying new formats. We're really thinking like, why would people actually travel to live this with us? What do we need to recapture in what we were doing that was the best, but how do we need to bonify? How do we need to change? How do we need to surprise and evolve the experience? And so it's really been extremely motivating to work with some of the best teams out there to kind of, spend time thinking about the product, the experience, take risks again, and really connect back to this kind of DNA that's really innovative in what we do. Um, and almost a bit of this rebel status of like, all right, we might not having all figured out, but let's just try. Let's connect back to this desire of pushing forward and being a trendsetter in our industry. And so, and also for our community, like, we're such an amazing city with tons of creative talent. Like, how do we act as a curator? How do we get all these people in to create something that's fantastic, that's going to shine all around the world? And then from an operational perspective, I think like flexibility is key. Um, and the good thing is that the workforce kind of is asking for flexibility in some way as well. It's not like your young talents looking for, a 40-year gig um necessarily, right? So I think it's just kind of looking at how can we attract the best, how can we create or foster an environment where people can come and do some of the best work of their lives, remaining agile and flexible from a cost structure perspective, because we're project driven, it's project based, there's a lot of things happening in the economy. And so if we have too much of a heavy structure, then it becomes really hard for us to pivot. And so, yeah, I think these are kind of key.
Yeah, yeah, it's super interesting, and I think that for me, the subsequent question I think is based on what you mentioned. Right? Like obviously, C2 is known for the definition is commerce and creativity, right? Like the one and the other, and they need to go both hand in hand. And curious as to how you manage to maintain the culture of creativity, right? Which ends up being paramount because it's the foundation of the business, is how you have gross margins and everything, like how you're able to sell. So the commerce piece is tied to the creativity piece, but the creativity piece is also messy, right? It doesn't happen in, like a very structured, like a sales process kind of way. So like, yeah, curious to unpack about how you've approached working with the creative minds at C2.
Well, I'm still figuring it out because I'm coming from the business side of it more. But no, so, jokes aside, I think we went and got some really good people, like some people that were kind of instrumental in being a source of motivation um, for their teammates. And I feel that we're connecting back to an ethos of being more, um, I would say, more of a curator than having to design everything in house and being more hermetic in terms of our creativity. And so, we partner with a bunch of amazing talents. There's a good pool in Montreal. We're lucky. Um, the advantage of us being an agency that has its own flagship is a huge asset for us because creatives know the brand, right? So this makes it easier for us to kind of attract talent in some way. And then just collaboration. Like there are tons of other studios that are doing amazing work. How can we leverage this community to kind of fuel our own inspiration, but also our clients' project? And so I think it's a mix of having that philosophy of, just being a bit more inclusive and connected to our community, and then having a key folks internally that are really leaders and that are kind of helping nurture this mindset, this ecosystem, that have the right connections, and that really act as like catalysts to positioning the company as a place where creative can thrive. Whether they're full-time employees, part-time employees, other businesses that we collaborate with, so that we keep the focus on providing the best possible experience for our partners, our clients, our participants. Yeah. And then I think, and I'm going to stop on this after, but I think it's also expanding creativity to other parts of the business. Like I think creative is not just about the creative team, it's about how we're all working. And, you know, good business people are creative, right? And so I think it's also about nurturing kind of this mindset where creativity shouldn't just lie in the creative group. Like we should all think creatively. Like marketing, the way we go to market should be creative. The way we sell, the way we engage with our clients. Um, I think we all need, in a time where there's a lot of changes and instability, to tap into the spirit of like, how are we solving problems in a way that's original?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, using the creative side to like positively contaminate the other sides of the business as well. I think another thing that you said that I found is really neat is the notion of community, right? So like I grew up in the agency world, earlier in my career, and like there's a bunch of really good agencies here in the city, a lot of good creative people. So like I said, not being a hermit, but then using the some other firms to help augment what we're doing from the creative side. So yeah, I find that as a very neat kind of concept, of course, because it's grounded into the values. Have you thought about a longer term vision of like how where do you want to take the organization?
I would just really love for us to produce some of the best experiences in the world. Like I think there's great potential in connecting humans. Um, and for now we're really focusing on B2B, but I think there's a whole notion of business entertainment that we can really tap into. Like, if you look at what businesses do to host our clients, to me, there's something interesting in the evolution of the business persona. So the business landscape isn't made of people that looked like what they looked like in like 25 years ago. And so, how do you actually create entertainment experiences for the next generation of business people and executives? Like, how do you allow, or how do you engage, you know, brands with their consumers, with their clients, with their employees? Like, how do you leverage human connection to foster some great relationships in that world? I feel is something that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the right answer, just because I feel like you see everything that's happening in the world of software and programmatic technologies, things like AI, etc. So it's like the thing that's going to differentiate a good business is its creativity aspect. So it's like it's not just for C2, but every business in the world is going to look for this kind of like, again, human connection. I think you're betting on the right trend. Will you revisit ideas like, like city expansion? Like I think, like you guys have gone like to Australia, tried. Have you looked at other cities, or you're going to double down on partnering with brands and other organizations that look to enhance their own creativity and like human connection, like you mentioned?
Mhm. For now, Montreal is our playground for everything that is linked to the C2 brand. From that model, from taking like a promoter risk, if you want. And part of the reason for that is that we're deeply ingrained in the community. What it takes to create something like what we have in Montreal requires kind of this group of people that have that collective vision of creating something that's going to showcase the best of what we do out there to the world in a very authentic way to generate economic impact. And so for us to reproduce that model in another city, we would need to kind of, the model needs to be different. Like it would need to be a group of people who would kind of, offset maybe creative for us or production for us, but have their own kind of group or community, because we've tried it before and it was really hard. And so I think for us, the growth really will be coming from the partnering that we do with brands, more on the studio side. And the other portion that we're exploring right now that's really interesting is we're creating spaces and design work under our brand with partners like the Accor Hotel Group, with real estate developers that own like convention centers and all, to kind of define, what is the next generation of meeting spaces. So for us to have a bit more impact on our industry and scale that impact, it's like, how can we work at the level of where meetings are actually hosted to transform that experience from more of the hardware almost aspect. And so yeah, I think these are really the two spots where we're going to focus. And then where I see that there might be some opportunities, it's kind of signature products. So when we're talking about business entertainment, or like a lot of hosting is involved, can we create amazing dinner concepts that brand leverage to host their clients? Can we create, a signature um, kind of team building product that can be leveraged by brands? So I think there will be things that we'll explore from a brand perspective as well, just not in the same format of like, selling tickets and partners and all of that. I think this is really, for Montreal, for our hometown, for our community. And it's a lot. It's a lot of energy. So yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, I think you have to try and fail to learn, what works, what doesn't. And I like how you're doubling down on what works right now, partnering with brands, but also experimenting with the spaces, right? So I wasn't familiar with that aspect. How nascent is this new business proposition? Like, how far along are you?
Well, it's actually not that nascent. So we've had the C2 space at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel for probably around 4-ish years right now. Um, and so what we're doing now is kind of expand and double down on that vision that, JF, our founder, initially had, um, and finding a way to kind of expand it with partnering with not just a hotel, but like a group that has a progressive vision for convening, that owns a lot of properties and that has the capacity to kind of, create 20, 40, 100 of these spaces around the world. Some with design principles that are ingrained to their brands, and some maybe leveraging the C2 brand. So we're opening up. We actually did our first event a couple of weeks back at the C2 space in Paris at the Pullman Hotel Paris Montparnasse. So that's the first kind of space that we're opening outside of Montreal. And yeah, so that was pretty exciting. And I hope that we have our brand, in beautiful spaces like that all around the world at some time.
Yeah, that's I think it's a great, very inspiring vision, Anik. And then, yeah, you mentioned. So yeah, my mistake. I've been to the C2 space a few times. I've actually rented like a conference room for customers. So I like that idea of like going back to that trend of human connection, where if it's something that a machine could do, a machine will do it. Versus what people
Mm.
crave is this notion of being close to people. How like I know we mentioned the pandemic. Maybe one final question on it. Like how do you see it positively impacting your business moving forward? I don't want to talk about the dark years like that are hopefully now behind us. But what do you see as any positive things that have come out of it?
Well, at the beginning, I thought that there would be, because our industry, when you're looking at convenings, right? And we're in a B2B space for now, so we're dealing with large corporations that are usually not super, they're a bit more risk averse, I would say. And so there's a lot of the industry that's really risk averse, that loves to do something that they know is going to work. And the pandemic just like, it kind of like nobody had any comfort anymore. You were taking a risk from the moment you were deciding to get people to be together in a room. And so a room or a Zoom or, some form of digital convening. And so I wish that part of that mindset kept its place of like, let's try new things. Let's not be so scared about, you know, taking a risk, and let's embrace change, and let's really leverage everything that's out there, to create the best possible experiences. And so this, I feel, it's still there, but it's there's a bit of a getting back to like, more traditional older habits in some way. And this is general, right? So we have clients that are absolutely amazing and are willing to kind of like test a bunch of stuff. So it's not, it's not a look on everybody that's out there. But I I feel that what's great is that it really opened a lot of possibilities in kind of bridging or leveraging technology as a way to enhance what we live in the real world, or in like the in real life. And so this to me is probably where a lot of very exciting things are going to happen. um when you look at what's happening in the gaming world, what's happening in the retail world, what's happening in the entertainment industry, um, there's a lot of fertile grounds when you're thinking about creating experiences where you're like, if I can leverage all these tools, if I can leverage everything that's available to me now, what can we really create that's amazing and immersive and engaging and different?
Yeah, like you said, it's very should I say inspiring the way you're approaching it, and you speak to so many leaders, right? Like in terms of like not just internally, but also the companies you work with. What advice would you have to leaders that are like from a people's perspective are struggling? The whole remote work challenge of like, hey, it's actually kind of still good to meet in person, right? And I think that a lot of people are struggling with this duality. What advice do you give to leaders, again, going back to this, let's say, human empathy and human connection perspective?
Well, look, I mean, I think I advice. I I always find it funny when we ask me that, because I'm like, okay, what advice am I going to give to leaders out there? But I guess what I'm trying to really do for myself right now is not compromise or not act out of fear. We all have this intuition, sometimes you're like, I feel my business needs to be together. I feel like, for this project, we should be in the office together, collaborating. But then sometimes there's this voice inside that's like, oh, well, maybe if we ask people to be 3 days in the office, they're not going to like it and they're going to want to go and work for someone else. And I feel that leading from a place of fear is not good. And like tuning into your intuition is so important. And at the end of the day, if you feel that, creating those moments of connections, being in real life together, um, you know, getting people to fly for an amazing event that you're going to create for them in real life, if that's what you feel you should do for your business or for your project, I feel that, kind of following that intuition is probably the right thing to do, because otherwise you're just compromising, not listening to yourself, acting out of fear. And I think the impact on the long term are probably more important than the impact on the short term that could cause. So that's really something I'm trying to to implement or do for myself right now. Um, Also because I feel that, part of how we're working and what we're delivering requires this level of interconnectivity and human touch. And so, kind of trying to do it for ourselves first, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very great way to end the conversation, and it's super inspiring. And I think great advice. Like you said, you're not good at giving it. I think you are. My final, traditional closing question is: if people want to reach out, connect with you directly, or just learn more about C2 Montreal, what's the best way?
Well, first of all, it's May 24th to 26th. You can go on c2montreal.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I always answer my LinkedIn's. Love the platform, actually. So hit me up there. And it would be just fantastic to see all of you guys. Like last year was our first kind of, getting back in real life downtown. And it was so amazing to see everybody there. It felt almost like a high school reunion where people were hugging and like, and so for me, these are the most precious moments, so just hope that I see a lot of you guys over there in May, and we're going to have great content, new formats. And, I'm pretty sure people will be stoked with the experience.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Anik, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. As always, thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe. If you want to learn more, check out thepnr.com.